"You're useless now, Mom. Find somewhere else to die." Those were my daughter's words, spoken with the same mouth that once whispered, "I love you," between bedtime prayers. In that moment, something inside me broke with no sound at all, like glass cracking in the dark. The suitcase scraping across the floor was the only goodbye I got. The house still smelled of lilies from the funeral and the bitter sweetness of coffee that had gone cold. Vivian stood in the doorway in her black designer coat, her perfume sharp enough to sting. Her eyes didn't look at me. They inspected me, like an old piece of furniture she'd already decided to throw out. "Mom," she said, brushing imaginary dust from the banister. "You can't live here alone anymore. The stairs, the upkeep. This place is too much for you." But what she meant was clear. "You are too much for me." I watched her glide from room to room, moving through my memories as if she owned them. The morning light cut through the curtains and cast its pattern across the floor, a perfect grid of shadow and gold, like a chessboard. Samuel used to play there, his laughter echoing through the halls. He'd say, "Every piece matters, Ellie, even the smallest one." I never realized until that day how cruelly life can turn its board. She brought Daniel that evening, her husband, all smiles and spreadsheets. He laid glossy pamphlets across the table while I poured tea with trembling hands. "Independent living communities," he said. "You'd love it. Freedom, company, no stress." The pictures on the pages showed old people smiling beside lakes that probably didn't exist. I stared at the photos until they blurred. In the days that followed, Vivian came often, always with a new pretense of care. Each visit carried a new plan. "You'd be happier somewhere smaller. Dad would have wanted this. It's time to move on." But the tone was wrong, too polished, too rehearsed. I began to sense the performance under the pity. Then came Tuesday, the day the mask finally cracked. The knock on the door sounded like judgment. Vivian stood there with Daniel, 2 large suitcases beside them. "Mom," she began with fake gentleness, "we've made a decision. Daniel got the promotion, and we need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us." I stared at her, the words refusing to form sense. "Move in? Vivian, this is my home." She sighed, her expression folding into irritation. "Actually, no. According to Dad's will, everything belongs to me now. The house, the accounts, everything. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place." The world blurred. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice shaking. "No mistake," she snapped. "Dad trusted me with his legacy. You were never good with money. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 43 years of love and sacrifice, reduced to 3 words that sounded like dirt thrown on a coffin. I packed my life into 2 suitcases because that's all I had left. Each photograph, each dish, each piece of fabric carried a small death. Vivian checked her watch as I folded my grief. Daniel carried the bags to their car without a word, his face calm in the way only cowards can be. Before leaving, she slipped $200 into my palm. "This should cover you for a few days, Mom. I'll transfer more later." She didn't. The door closed behind me with a sound so final it could have been the end of a movie. The motel they drove me to smelled of bleach and loneliness. The bedspread was printed with faded ships sailing nowhere. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my empty hands, and realized that everything I had ever built, every birthday, every meal, every quiet morning, now belonged to someone who saw me as disposable. But that night, as tears finally came, I remembered Samuel's voice. "Even a pawn can become a queen, if she takes the right risks." I whispered it into the darkness until my heart steadied. Maybe I'd been the pawn long enough. Tomorrow, I would move my first piece. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The motel curtains were thin, the light already bleeding through, and the hum of traffic felt louder than it should. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't seen in years. Harold Whitaker, attorney at law. Samuel had trusted him, and Samuel never trusted easily. The bus ride downtown cost me $3.20, half a breakfast, half my pride. The city looked unfamiliar, as if grief had changed the angles of every building. When I reached the office, the brass letters on the door seemed almost accusatory. Whitaker and Sons, Legal Counsel. Inside, the air smelled of dust, lemon polish, and old secrets. When Harold looked up from his desk and saw me, his expression faltered. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I was wondering when you'd come." Those words stopped me cold. "You were expecting me?" He nodded slowly. "I called several times after the funeral, but Vivian said you were traveling, that you didn't want to handle Samuel's affairs." My heart dropped. "Traveling?" He frowned, puzzled. "Yes, she said you'd asked her to represent you. I even sent copies of the will to your address." I shook my head. "I never saw anything." Harold's eyes hardened in the way good men do when they smell dishonesty. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder sealed with a red ribbon. "Then it's time you heard the truth from me." He untied the ribbon and opened the papers carefully, the sound sharp in the quiet room. The legal phrases blurred in my vision, but a few words cut through. "Primary residence, 70% of assets, to my beloved wife, Eleanor Hart." My breath caught. "What?" Harold's voice lowered. "Samuel left you the house and most of his estate, roughly $23 million. For a moment I couldn't speak. The walls seemed to tilt. I gripped the arm of the chair to stay grounded. "And Vivian?" I managed. He hesitated before answering. $10 million, held in trust, contingent upon her treatment of you." That last sentence landed like thunder. Contingent upon her treatment of you. I stared at the words until they blurred. Samuel had known. He had seen what I hadn't. The greed in our daughter's smile, the calculation behind every word. He'd written justice into his last breath. "She told me," I whispered, "that everything was hers, that you read the will, and I got nothing." Harold's jaw clenched. "Then she forged documents. Eleanor, that's fraud, and it's a crime. We'll need to act quickly." His voice was calm, professional, but all I could hear was the echo of my husband's promise. Every piece matters, even the smallest one. For years I had been that small piece, standing quietly at the edge of the board. Not anymore. When I left the office, the sun was fierce, the kind of light that burns away illusions. I walked past shop windows, my reflection fractured between glass and gold. In one of them, behind the glare, a chess set sat on display. All the pieces gleamed under the light, except the queen, carved from black wood, her crown chipped but proud. I stopped, staring at her, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the time I left Harold's office, the city felt different, colder, sharper, as if every window reflected what I had refused to see for years. I took the bus back to the motel, the folder clutched against my chest like a shield. The papers inside didn't just prove ownership, they proved I hadn't been crazy. The humiliation I'd swallowed, the confusion, the guilt, none of it was imagined. Vivian had stolen from me, from her own mother, and smiled while doing it. That night I couldn't sleep. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of sirens, the faint laughter from the next room, all of it blurred into one long pulse of noise. My hands kept shaking, my thoughts circling the same question. Why did she hate me enough to do this? I tried to find an answer in the ceiling, in the faint crack that split the plaster like a fault line. But the only voice that came back was Samuel's. "Every game has rules, Ellie. Break one, and the board resets." By morning, I knew what I had to do. Harold had already called the police and reported the forgery. Detective Morales, a calm woman with dark eyes that missed nothing, met me in his office the next day. She listened as I explained how my daughter had thrown me out, how the documents had been faked, how the signatures didn't belong to me. She didn't interrupt, just took notes with steady hands. When I finished, she nodded. "We'll verify everything. In the meantime, Mrs. Hart, you need to prepare yourself. This won't be quick, and it won't be quiet." Quiet. That word had defined my entire life. Quiet wife, quiet mother, quiet grief, not anymore. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, Vivian's access to the bank accounts was frozen. The utilities she'd transferred to her name were suspended pending verification. Her world began to shrink, inch by inch, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Justice, it seemed, had its own rhythm. Then, at 3:47 that afternoon, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen like a ghost. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with forced calm. "There's some kind of mistake. The banks are saying Dad's assets are frozen. Can you—" I cut her off. "I'm at Harold Whitaker's office, Vivian. Do you remember him? Daddy's attorney? The one who read the real will?" Silence. A silence so deep I could hear the sound of her breath catch. "Mom," she tried again, softer now. "You don't understand?" "No," I said. "You don't understand. You forged documents, lied to the police, and threw your mother out of her home for money that was never yours." Her tone shifted from panic to ice. "You're confused. Someone's taking advantage of you." The audacity almost made me laugh. Even cornered, she was still performing. "Vivian," I said quietly, "your father knew exactly who you were. He wrote it into the will. Contingent upon your treatment of me. You failed that test the moment you told me to find somewhere else to die." For a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then her voice broke into a plea. "Please, Mom, let's talk about this. We can fix it. Together." "I already did," I said. "The police are on their way to your house." I hung up before she could answer. My hands were steady this time. When I looked out the office window, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promise rain, but hold it just long enough to make you wait. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to move. Harold looked up from his desk, studying me. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just thinking about how quiet this house will be without her voice in it." He smiled faintly, understanding. "Justice isn't always loud, Eleanor. Sometimes it whispers." That night, back at the motel, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine from the vending machine in the lobby. The TV flickered silently, showing a storm rolling across some distant state. As lightning flashed, I caught my reflection in the dark window, older, yes, but unbroken. Vivian thought she'd taken everything from me, but what she'd really done was set me free. The game wasn't over, not even close. They arrested her at 8:32 p.m. on a Thursday. Harold called me the next morning, his voice carrying that strange blend of satisfaction and regret only justice can bring. "She and Daniel were dining at Le Bernard's when it happened," he said, "right in the middle of ordering wine." I pictured it. Vivian, frozen mid-gesture, her smile slipping as two officers stepped up to the table. Daniel's confusion giving way to fury, the murmurs spreading through the restaurant like a chill. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. When the police came for her, I was sitting on the porch of the motel, watching moths fling themselves at the yellow light. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Checkmate," and went back inside. The following day, Detective Morales met me again. "The evidence is strong," she said. "Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. Your daughter and son-in-law were both involved. Their accounts are frozen." Her tone was even, but her eyes softened. "Are you ready to return to your house?" My house. Two words that suddenly felt heavy with meaning. When I crossed that threshold again, the air was thick with someone else's perfume and chaos. Vivian had already begun to claim the space, her expensive coats hanging in my closet, boxes of designer shoes spilling across the floor, my husband's study stripped bare and repainted in a sterile cream. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence between the walls. The home I had tended for decades felt like a stranger wearing my skin. I spent that night cleaning. Not because it needed to be done, but because I did. Every drawer I emptied, every surface I wiped, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By dawn, the trash bags were lined up on the porch, filled with her perfume bottles and the ghosts of her entitlement. The smell of disinfectant mixed with fresh coffee, and for the first time since Samuel's death, the house actually breathed again. At noon, Harold stopped by with updates. Vivian's bail is set at 50,000. Daniel's at 200. The judge isn't feeling generous. He smiled faintly. Seems your son-in-law had other skeletons. Securities fraud, falsified documents, the list is long. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once taught Vivian how to roll cookie dough with her small, flour-covered hands. She'll hate me, I said quietly. Harold leaned forward. Eleanor, she already did. What you're doing now is saving yourself. Later that afternoon, I opened every window in the house. The wind came rushing in, carrying the scent of rain and freedom. In the garden, Samuel's rose bushes had overgrown into wild tangles, the petals deep crimson against the gray sky. I clipped a few and placed them in a jar on the table, small proof that beauty can survive neglect. That evening, the phone rang again. Vivian's number. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was small, frayed around the edges. "Mom, they said I might go to prison. Please, you have to help me." "Help you?" The irony nearly took my breath away. "Do you remember," I asked, "what you said when you threw me out?" Silence. "I remember every word," I said, "especially the last one. Useless." "Mom, please." But I was done rescuing people who enjoyed watching me drown. "I hope one day you understand what that word really means," I said softly and hung up. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the windows. The storm had been waiting all week, and now it finally broke. Rain hammered against the glass as lightning lit the chessboard still sitting on the side table. Samuel's last game remained frozen mid-match, a single pawn standing inches from the opposite side. I smiled through the tears that came uninvited. He'd left it that way on purpose. He'd known I'd finish it one day. I moved the pawn forward, one square. Then I whispered, "For you, my love," and let the queen rise. The storm raged outside, but inside I finally felt calm. Peace didn't last long. It rarely does. 3 days after the arrest, Harold came by again, this time without his usual calm. He set a thick envelope on the table, the kind that carries trouble. "Eleanor," he began, "there's something you should see." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. He slid a stack of documents toward me. Account ledgers, transfers, signatures in Samuel's unmistakable handwriting. "These were flagged by the financial department during the investigation into Vivian and Daniel," he said. "Your husband's company was moving large sums of money through consulting contracts, but many of the firms don't actually exist." I blinked. "Are you saying Samuel was laundering money?" Harold hesitated. "There are patterns that suggest it. We can't confirm yet, but the amounts are significant." My throat went dry. I wanted to laugh, to deny it, but the papers were solid and cold under my fingers. The man I'd built my life around, the man who quoted Shakespeare over breakfast, who kissed my forehead every night for 43 years, had been hiding something enormous right under my nose. The irony was unbearable. Vivian had called me naive, weak, ignorant about finances. Maybe she hadn't been entirely wrong. That night, I went into Samuel's old study, the one Vivian had painted over. I'd already stripped her new color off the walls, scraping until my arms ached. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk and found the wooden box he'd always kept locked. The key was still hanging behind our wedding photo. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them. Samuel's handwriting, neat, deliberate, familiar. At first they read like work journals, contracts, figures, meeting notes, but deeper in, I found names I didn't recognize, initials beside amounts that made no sense. It was all so carefully coded that I almost admired it. Almost. I sat there until sunrise, my eyes burning, my heart twisting between love and betrayal. Had he protected me from this, or from himself? The next morning, I called Detective Morales. When she arrived, she flipped through the notebooks in silence, her face unreadable. Finally, she said, "Mrs. Hart, I'm not sure your husband was what he seemed. These look like ledgers for an operation. Possibly money laundering, maybe worse." My knees weakened. I gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright. If that's true, what happens to the money he left me? She closed the notebook gently. If the funds are proven to come from illegal sources, they could be seized. But don't jump ahead. We need to know who was involved and whether Samuel knew." "Of course he knew," I whispered. "He wrote every number with his own hand." For a long time, she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes good men do bad things for reasons we don't understand. But if you want the truth, I'll help you find it." After she left, I sat in the study surrounded by papers and ghosts. The house was so quiet, I could hear the rain ticking against the windows. I remembered how Samuel used to say, "Every move is about foresight, Ellie. Even mistakes are strategy when you look far enough ahead." What, had this been strategy too? Or had I married a man I never really knew? Later that night, as the thunder rolled across the sky, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that came through made my skin prickle. "Mom?" Vivian whispered, her voice trembling through static. "You don't understand. Dad wasn't who you think he was. There are things coming that you can't stop. Please, meet me." Before I could answer, the line went dead. I stood there, staring at the receiver, the storm echoing outside. For the first time in weeks, I felt fear. Real fear. The game had changed again, and this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know who was playing. I met her in the rain. Vivian had chosen a deserted park on the edge of town, the same one where Samuel used to feed pigeons on Sunday mornings. Now it was just puddles and wind, trees swaying like witnesses who'd seen too much. I almost turned back twice, but something heavier than fear pulled me forward. She was standing near the gazebo, soaked to the bone, her mascara streaked down her face. For a moment, she looked like a child again, lost and sorry. But I'd learned not to trust appearances. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming." I didn't answer. I stayed 3 steps away, umbrella tilted just enough to see her, but not enough to hide my eyes. "Whatever this is," I said, "say it fast." She took a shaky breath. "They're coming for you, for both of us." "Who?" "Dad's partners, the ones he was laundering money for." I blinked at her. "You're lying." "I wish I were." Her voice cracked. "Kevin, Daniel, he found files after Dad died, records, offshore accounts. He contacted them to negotiate. He thought he could make a deal, but they want everything back. They found out the police have the ledgers. Mom, they know you have them now." The air around me seemed to collapse. How would they know that? She looked away. "Because Kevin told them before he was arrested. He thought he could trade information for protection. But now he's in too deep, and they're watching everyone connected to the money. They called me this morning. They said if I didn't warn you, they'd—" Her voice broke. "They'd make sure you disappeared. Just like Dad." "Just like Dad?" I repeated, my pulse rising. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He died of a heart attack." Her face twisted. "That's what you were supposed to believe. But Daniel found the coroner's report. It didn't match the hospital's file. Dad had bruises, restraint marks. They said cardiac arrest, but the truth is, Mom, Dad was working with them and the FBI at the same time. He was playing both sides. They found out. The world tilted again. You're saying your father was murdered?" She nodded, sobbing now. "He was trying to protect you. He kept the operation going long enough to collect evidence for the Bureau. But something went wrong. Someone betrayed him." For a long time I couldn't speak. The rain hit harder, running cold down my sleeves. I remembered his late nights, the cryptic phone calls, the quiet apologies. I thought they were guilt or exhaustion. I never imagined they were fear. "Vivian," I said finally, "if what you're saying is true, why come to me now? You've already taken everything else." She wiped her face with shaking hands. "Because I was wrong. About everything. I wanted the money because I thought it would make me safe, but I'm not safe, Mom. None of us are." A car passed at the far end of the park, its headlights slicing through the fog. For a second, we both froze, instinctively turning away. The sound faded, but my heart didn't slow. She stepped closer. "The FBI wants to talk to you. They called me this morning. They know you have the ledgers. They can protect you. If you give them everything. I stared at her, rain running from her hair like ink. And you? What do you get out of this sudden redemption? She gave a small, broken laugh. Survival. I should have felt sympathy, but I didn't. Only exhaustion. If you truly wanted to survive, Vivian, you shouldn't have started a war you didn't understand. Before she could answer, my phone vibrated. The screen flashed with an unknown number and a short text. Leave the park, now. I looked up, scanning the trees, the cars, the street beyond the fence. A man stood under a lamppost at the corner, dark coat, still as stone. When our eyes met, he turned and disappeared into the rain. Vivian saw my face pale. What is it? Someone's watching us, I whispered. She grabbed my hand, a reflex old and fragile. And for a second, I let her. Mom, please, she said, panic rising. Go to the FBI, tell them everything. Tell them Dad was working for them. It's the only way to stay alive. I pulled my hand away. And you? She swallowed hard. I'll turn myself in. Maybe they'll listen if you... But I was already walking away, the message still glowing in my palm. When I reached the street, I looked back. Vivian was still standing there, shoulders hunched against the storm. For a brief, cruel second, I almost saw the little girl she'd been, the one who used to play chess with Samuel on rainy afternoons. But that girl was gone, and the game we were in now had far deadlier stakes. As thunder rolled behind me, I whispered to the night, Your move, Samuel. Your move. The message on my phone kept burning in my mind. Leave the park. Now. I didn't run, not yet. But every step toward the street felt like walking across thin ice. The rain had turned into needles, cold and heavy. I could taste metal in the air, the kind that comes before lightning or revelation. Harold's office was dark when I arrived, but I still knocked until the lights flickered on. He opened the door in his shirt sleeves, surprise shadowed by worry. Eleanor, he said, ushering me inside. What happened? I told him everything. Vivian's call, the park, the man in the rain, the truth she'd confessed about Samuel's death. He listened in silence, his jaw tightening. When I finished, he went to a locked cabinet and took out another folder, thicker than all the rest. There's something I didn't tell you, he said, voice low. Detective Morales called me yesterday. They've confirmed Samuel's accounts were tied to an ongoing FBI operation. Your husband was working undercover as an informant, pretending to launder money while feeding the Bureau information on the crime families behind it. I blinked, stunned. He was helping them? Harold nodded. For over a decade, every suspicious transaction was approved by federal oversight. He risked everything, even his life. That's why he changed the will 6 months ago. He knew things were closing in. My legs went weak. I sank into the chair beside the desk. And his heart attack? Harold met my eyes. It wasn't natural. The Bureau suspects he was silenced before he could testify. But before his death, he sent them the final ledgers, the same ones you found. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. The man I had buried with guilt and grief had died protecting the truth, protecting me. All the anger, all the confusion I had carried for weeks cracked open into something raw and unbearable. I pressed a hand over my mouth and whispered, he knew she would betray me. That's why he wrote it into the will. Harold nodded slowly. He wanted to make sure that even if he couldn't save himself, he'd save you. Before I could reply, a new voice came from the doorway. He did more than that. Detective Morales stood there, coat dripping, her badge glinting under the lamplight. Mrs. Hart, she said gently, we've been trying to reach you. The Bureau wants to meet tonight. They need your help closing the case. I followed her to a black sedan waiting outside. The streets blurred past the window, wet and gleaming, the city lights bending like candle flames. When we reached the federal building, I half expected to wake up. But inside, everything smelled of coffee, metal, and urgency. Agent Sarah Martinez, young, composed, eyes sharp as a scalpel, greeted me with a nod. Mrs. Hart, your husband was one of our best covert informants. We owe him more than we can say. The ledgers you turned over confirmed his work. Thanks to you, we can dismantle an entire network. And Vivian? I asked. Her gaze softened. She'll serve her sentence. But because she cooperated, because she warned you, we may consider leniency. I looked down at my hands. Mercy isn't the same as forgiveness, I said quietly. No, she agreed. But sometimes it's a start. After I signed the final papers, Martinez handed me an envelope sealed with the FBI crest. Your husband recorded this months before he died, she said. He wanted it delivered if you ever came to us. Back home, I opened it alone in the study. The room smelled faintly of dust and roses. Samuel's voice filled the air, calm, steady, heartbreakingly familiar. If you're hearing this, Ellie, it means you found the truth. I knew Vivian might lose herself to greed. I knew you'd suffer for it. But I also knew you, the woman who builds peace out of chaos, who endures storms without bending. If the board has turned, remember this. You were never the pawn. You were always the queen. I just had to give you the right game. I pressed the recorder to my chest and sobbed until dawn. Weeks later, when the trials ended and the headlines faded, I found myself standing in the garden at sunrise. The roses had begun to bloom again, wild and stubborn, the way Samuel liked them. In the kitchen, a fresh pot of coffee steamed beside the old chessboard. I set up the pieces the way he used to, his black against my white. And this time, I didn't wait for his move. I pushed the queen forward, her path clear and unstoppable. Checkmate, I whispered. Not in triumph, but in peace.